All right, should be good to go.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andrew.
No problem.
Okay, now I'm going to get us recording to the cloud, and then I'm going to start the webinar right now. And Mr. Chairman, I think it's all yours.
Okay, very good. Welcome to the March 9th, 2022 BAR Large virtual meeting. My name is John Robinson, and I'll be serving as chairman this afternoon and evening. The other board members present this afternoon are Jay White, Luda Sobchuk, James Metters, and Carol Wheeler, serving as an alternate, and who will be recusing on agenda item number 2. City staff present are Torrey Parrish and Lawrence Courtney. The order of the meeting will be as follows. There will be an initial introduction and overview of the project by city staff for the board and public. There will then be an applicant presentation lasting for 10 minutes with extensions granted by the chair as necessary. And any questions of the applicant by the board or staff. Any and all presenters should clearly state their name for the record. Persons affiliated with the project, be they owners, developers, designers, consultants, or others, should speak during this portion of the meeting rather than following public comment period. There then follows a written public comment period. Written comments are due by noon the business day before the meeting. They've been transmitted to the board members as soon as possible thereafter, unless determined by the chairman. To the contrary, the written comments will not be read aloud during the meeting. This is then followed by live public comment. There will be a 2-minute time limit per person for public figures or participants from the public, or with reasonable extensions allowed by the chair. The applicant does not respond to comments made during the public comment period. Again, as with the applicants, members of the public need to state their name and address for the record. Public comment period is followed by city staff comments and recommendations. This is followed by an optional 5-minute applicant response or clarification period to either the public comment and city staff comments and recommendations. The applicant will then take a seat and will not speak further unless called upon by the board or staff. This is followed by board discussion and vote. The applicant presentation and public comment periods are closed. The applicant may clarify inaccurate information when recognized by the chair by raising a hand and waiting to be called upon, but otherwise only may speak if asked a question by board member or staff. I would note before we begin that items 3 and 8 have been deferred by the applicants. This is a reminder to all participants to please turn off cell phones and other disruptive devices. This is a further reminder to please limit your comments to architecture only, which is the purview of this board. Comments related to zoning, such as parking, traffic, lot coverage, and livability concerns are not the purview of this board and therefore cannot be sounded here. Further protocol for the meeting. Please note the following updates to public participation effective fall of 2021, beginning with the September 22nd meeting and for all meetings going forward. Deadline to submit written comments is 12 p.m. one business day before the meeting. Deadline to sign up to speak at the meeting is 12 p.m. the day of the meeting. Written comments are received by the board in advance of the meeting and will be acknowledged in the record and summarized. If this is a concern, members of the public are encouraged to sign up to speak at the meeting. Public comment instructions are to use one of the following methods to submit written comments. To sign up or speak at the meeting, please provide your name, address, telephone number, meeting date, and project number. Complete the citizen participation form at innovate.charleston-sc.gov or call the line at 843-724-3765 or mail your comments to the Department of Planning, Preservation, and Sustainability, number 2 George Street, Charleston 29401. Further board protocol regarding meeting procedures. Staff control the PowerPoint presentation that includes everything submitted by the applicant by the required deadline in accordance with the submittal requirements. The applicant simply needs to ask the staff to advance to whichever slide they want to present from. Applicant, staff, and board members are required to give their name prior to speaking or when speaking. Video and microphone has been disabled for all attendees. Attendees, as opposed to board members or staff, will only be given the capability to speak when they are called on during the public comment period. Chat and Q&A functions on Zoom have been disabled for all participants. Further protocol regarding public comment. The applicants, meaning all team members and the public, have been required to register, indicate the project they wish to comment on, and submit any documents in advance of this meeting. Just as in an in-person meeting, all applications heard today are part of a public meeting format. If you have registered and will speak during the public comment period of the meeting, you will need to state your name and address for the record. Those members of the public that have registered will be called upon in order by agenda item or project. Staff will call on the registered members of the public to speak for each project. Unregistered members of the public who raise their hand will not be called. Again, written comments have been received by the board in advance and will be summarized where necessary. Further board protocol. Board members will be polled by the chairperson for comments and their vote on a motion. Each member, when voting, should respond yea in favor or nay not in favor. The chair shall reread the motion verbatim, and the board member making the motion should correct the chair if he has not reread the motion accurately. If a board member needs to recuse, he or she will temporarily be removed from the meeting and placed back in the meeting at the start of the next agenda item. If the board needs to go into executive session, they will call into a separate conference line, and all video and audio on Zoom will temporarily be turned off until they're ready to return to the regular meeting. Ms. Parrish, agenda item number 1 for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This one is approval of the minutes from the last meeting, February 23rd. You would have received those yesterday. And if you have any corrections, this would be the time to note that. And otherwise, we're looking for a motion to approve those.
Any corrections or revisions from our fellow board members? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes as published by Ms. Parrish?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, I have a motion from Mr. Metters and a second from Ms. Wheeler. So the motion is now before the body. I'll proceed to call the roll. Ms. Sobchak, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay in favor.
Mr. White? Oops, no, you weren't, that's okay.
Sorry, I'm going to abstain here because I wasn't at that meeting.
Thank you. I think that's wise, and I knew that's what you were going to say there in your meeting. Mr. Metters?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. And did I call on the subject? I don't think I did. The subject?
Yes, I said yay.
You didn't call on me, I
Okay.
think.
Oh, Ms. Wheeler,
Yeah, yay in favor.
thank you so much. The minutes are approved as published unanimously. Ms. Parrish, agenda item number 2.
Thank you. All right, number 2 is 55 Romney Street, requesting final approval of a mock-up panel for this mixed-use project. This one is in the East Central neighborhood and is in the Historic Corridor District. All right, we have with this one, Mr. Craig Clements. I apologize. I forgot to,
He is already
Awesome.
active, I think.
Yes.
Okay,
Mr.
Craig?
Clements, you have the floor when you're ready.
All right, thank you. I'll see if I can option video. Perhaps not. Okay, well, I will just say I appreciate the board members all coming out yesterday and taking a look at the sample panel. Sort of feel like my presentation was there, not having the sample panel here with us tonight. We had some good discussion around it on site, and I'm not sure I have anything to add to that. Certainly can answer any further questions board members may have. Otherwise, would yield the balance of my time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clements. Live public comment on this agenda item, Ms. Parrish.
there is none.
Okay. City staff comments and recommendations.
All right. Want to make, I do have a few observations tonight that aren't in the slides, but I'll be reading them.
Sure.
It is noted that this is a very large mock-up, and while representing 4 large, distinctively separate towers over a podium base, the mock-up likely could have been downsized. Both the architect and contractor have explained that the mock-up has been used extensively to work out constructability issues. This goes back to the inordinate size and cost of mock-ups, to which staff and board are increasingly sensitive. And then in comments, it is noted that the sealant color in the red brick representation has been painted due to the lack of available sealant colors on the market at present. Staff hopes that this will be available soon and will wish to see representations of this color on sealants, MEP elements, and lintels on the actual building before work progresses. These colors on the mock-up are close but might be a bit dark. 2, it is understood that the lower projecting band at the stucco wall is to be eliminated due to being broken up frequently to accommodate flood panels. 3, if possible, shift the fabric awnings fully beneath the stucco band to eliminate the abrupt stops in the band above the windows. 4, lipped brick should be used at the lintels over the metal portions. 5, it is noted that the very dark sealant used between the stucco and metal elements needs to be lighter in order to better match the stucco color. And 6, the joint at the bottom of stucco walls needs to be restudied to allow for moisture release with a cleaner joint. This can be explored further on the mock-up and reviewed with staff. Recommendation is conceptual approval with board and staff comments, with sealant and paint colors to be reviewed in the field with staff.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Clements, if you choose to exercise it, you can rebut or clarify.
Those were all comments that I heard on site yesterday, and no clarifications needed.
Gather they were well received. Okay, we will now move to a board discussion and vote on this agenda item. What do my fellow board members have to say about agenda item number 2 at 55 Romney Street?
I'll jump in very quickly and say that I think that the overall execution of the mock-up is really quite nice. I appreciate staff's comment regarding the scope and scale of the mock-up, especially as it fully occupies a residential lot. I don't think that's the intent of our ordinances, and it's something that we as a board will probably have to address at some point. But I think in terms of this application and this project, I'm satisfied with staff's comments and their recommendation.
Further board commentary.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Did I override Ludovic?
No,
Okay.
Yeah.
So a couple of things I talked with them on site about yesterday, but just the cut edges of the flashing throughout that left an exposed metal, and to provide some type of a remedy for that. And there were a bracket that was supporting a wire mesh, and on that bracket there were both painted bolts, nuts, washers, and exposed bolts, nuts, and washers, and I don't know which one it's supposed to be, and maybe I couldn't find it on the plan, but are those zinc, are they stainless steel? Just paying attention to those details, as those will show themselves in the near future, if not the right materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meadows. Thoughtful as always.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Clement. Oh, was that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I lost you all for a moment.
We tried to get rid of you, but it didn't work.
No such luck.
If there was an issue or problem with the signal, even though I'm on a hard line, let me know.
Okay.
Since we've moved offices, but I just solicited further board comments and had heard none, and so therefore I was looking to entertain the motion.
I see. Thank you.
I'll introduce a motion for approval with board and staff comments.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. White, your motion was to approve incorporating board and staff comments. I have a second from Mr. Metters.
Yes, sir.
I'll proceed to call the roll. Ms. Sobchak,
Yay in favor?
Mr. White,
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters,
Yay in favor.
and myself, yay in favor. Passes unanimously. Congratulations to the applicant, and the comments from both staff and the board regarding the scope of mock-ups is duly noted as something to look at from our processes and procedures. Agenda item number 3.
Thank you all.
Agenda item number 3 is deferred by the applicant.
Oh, it was agenda item number 4.
All right, number 4 is 84 and 84.5 Society Street, requesting final approval for partial demolition of a one-story building. The building was constructed prior to 1955 and is in the Old and Historic District. An aerial slide to familiarize yourself. Society is across the bottom, left to right, and then got King Street on the left. And then we've got the building to your right. And notice the red brick portion is what's to be proposed for demolition. And then this is the building on your left, looking east. And looking west.
Who do we have here?
Okay. We have Mr. Tony Giuliani and Hank D'Antonio. I'll have them uploaded here in just a second.
Okay.
Upgraded. Okay, Mr. Giuliani. Lawrence, apparently I have no ability to do anything here.
Having trouble
All right.
finding the speaker.
All right, in that case,
I can't upgrade anyone.
okay.
We finally put you back into the box where you belong.
I'm losing my rights. Tony's name is in there. Can you make me co-host?
Yes, I can and will.
Okay. All right, let me try.
And
Okay.
I will make
That works.
John
All right. I just,
co-host as well.
Tony Giuliani's in the meeting,
Thank
but
you very
there's no
much.
Hank D'Antonio.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I see Mr. Giuliani, if he can unmute himself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can, Mr. Giuliani.
All right, and, I guess the owners of the property, there's Mark and Daniel. I don't know if they're in your list as well. They should be. But to keep things moving, I can go ahead and do the demolition, but the next presentation will need to be done by Mark.
Okay, very, very
Mark's
good.
in the meeting.
Mr. Giuliani, if you're comfortable proceeding, go ahead. If we need a minute to get everyone organized and rearranged, that's okay too.
No, I mean, to keep things going, I'll go ahead and do this. This is pretty straightforward. This is, like we said, requesting the demolition for 84 through 88 George Street, the rear portion, as is indicated on the slide that was just up. We, during the history of this building, there's not much since 1955. There, you can't really determine anything. And we shared this information with Ms. Parrish late this afternoon, but I believe they already had a copy of this record from the previous applicant. So the brick, the yellow brick we're proposing to keep, I guess the reddish brick we would propose to tear down. There was mention that this was a Constantine building, but we've never found any confirmation to that. So we don't know for sure if it was or if it was not. Yeah, that's pretty much all we have for this. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Giuliani. That's pretty straightforward. Thank you for the research and the continuing supplementing the information that you got on the board. Ms. Parrish, do we have any public comment on this agenda?
We do not.
I didn't think so from what I've seen earlier. Very good. City staff comments or recommendations?
All right, the rear portion of the building proposed for demolition is unremarkable with no real character defining features. 2, the plane at which demolition is proposed is demarcated by a marked change in brick and is a logical point for removal to the rear. 3, there is a brick projection to an adjacent property wall to the east, which will bear further study to ascertain what occurs behind it along the length of the wall. Regardless, it is assumed that whatever new construction is to follow can be handled for any adjusted existing conditions. And 4, any materials which can be salvaged and reused should be. We are recommending approval of partial demolition as noted with board and staff comments.
Okay, Mr. Giuliani, if you want to have any rebuttal or clarification, now's the time to do so. You certainly don't have to exercise it.
No, we're good. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So we'll proceed to board discussion and a vote on this agenda item.
Mr. Chairman, I just have one comment, item number 3 that Tori was talking about, that there is that one brick that is the same brick that we see on the front and side of the building that reaches out to the east, as Tori describes. And it's the sandboard map nor the survey that I looked at just doesn't show that. So it's just, it is an important detail. It certainly can be handled. It's an interesting detail.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Meadows. Further board comment? Hearing none, may I entertain a motion?
I move for approval, Mr. Chairman, partial demolition as noted with the board and staff comments.
The motion is for approval of partial demolition as noted with board and staff comments. Is there a second to that motion?
I will second.
Okay, seconded by Ms. Sobchak. The motion is proper. So we'll go down the roll. Mr. White, how do you vote on this agenda item?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters,
Yay in favor.
Ms. Sobchak,
Yay in favor.
Ms. Wheeler,
Yay in favor.
and myself, yay in favor. The motion to demolish is approved 5-0, incorporating board and staff comments. Thank you to the presenter.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 5, Ms. Parrish. Oh, you're muted, Tori.
I sure am. That's why I couldn't see the rest of the words. 29 to 35 George Street, 306 King Street, and 84 to 88 Society Street, requesting conceptual approval for construction of 2 new buildings, Building A at George Street and Building B at Society Street, to include a hotel and mixed uses incorporating a portion of the existing building. The height district is 6, and this is in the old and historic district. The aerial here should also be including the portion of the building that we just demolished. So the red box comes all the way down to Society. Some existing photos looking into the site from George Street. From Society with the existing remnant will be on your right there. And then looking west on George Street with the project would be on your left. And this one is east on George Street with the project to your right. East on Society. And looking west on Society. Project would be on your right. All right, I am trying to get everyone upgraded here to speak. We have Mr. Mark Batoni, who is in the meeting, and then I'm not finding Daniel's name.
I can see Daniel.
Hey, I'm so sorry. My audio cut out as soon as I was added as a panelist, so I just took out my headphones. Can you hear me now?
We can. Which of the two of you would like to lead off on this item?
I'll go ahead and lead off. Thank you all very much. My name is Daniel Porbaba. I'm the project applicant and owner. I'd like to thank you all so much for your time and effort reviewing the proposed project and sharing your feedback with us. I'd like to first start by saying that we feel really lucky to have the opportunity to work on this project. Charleston is one of the most special places in the world, and to be working on adding to the building fabric of Charleston in such an exceptional historic location that remains underutilized after all this time has been one of the highlights of my professional life. We feel a massive sense of responsibility and privilege to be involved, and have been so grateful for the support and genuinely thoughtful feedback and advice from so many stakeholders and community members. So I just wanted to thank all of you a lot before we kind of kick this off. Before we initiated any design work, we want to understand the various priorities that the community would have for this site. I will say there were many. Those priorities included preserving the historic 1950s theater, which we just discussed. It included maintaining public parking in order to support the vital interests of our neighboring businesses on King Street. It included activating the development of green space, mitigating traffic impacts, and including a mix of uses to really enhance the experience for residents and the public alike. And last but not least, to design something beautiful and inspirational. For us, it was also really important to go a step further and deliver one of the few projects in downtown Charleston that actually provides deed-restricted affordable workforce housing on site, alongside a mix of housing types that can meet the various needs of a growing and always dynamic Charleston, including luxury apartments and condos. After 2 years of working with various stakeholders with varying priorities and feedback, a lot of trial and error as we geeked out on varying design concepts, I really hope we have been able to meet and exceed some of these priorities. At a high level, the project is comprised of 2 buildings, the George Street apartment building and the Society Street hotel and condo building. On George, we have roughly 5,000 square feet of commercial, including restaurant space with outdoor seating, in addition to 101 luxurious apartments, some of which, as I said, will be deed restricted workforce housing units that will be available to teachers, firefighters, and other community members who serve Charleston and seek to live in an area that has otherwise become really darn expensive. The B building on Society is comprised of a 50 boutique hotel accommodation, restaurant, and 22 residential condos. In addition to the above things I've referenced, the project also includes some other features that, while they may not generate any income directly, and certainly meaningfully out of the cost, we feel will offer exceptional value, beauty, and benefit, not only to future guests and residents, but to the neighborhood and public at large. I would like to just name a few of them. Nearly 50% of our frontage along Society does not contain any building as currently proposed. Instead, we're proposing an open to sky park and sculpture garden that will be open to the public and dramatically enhance the pedestrian experience while providing a lovely setting to wind down or take a break after a busy walk down King Street or to take a coffee meeting. In other words, we're proposing to forego the opportunity cost building a structure in this area multiplied by the 6 allowable floors of building because we believe it will be stunning and worthwhile. This beautiful space would be further activated by a cafe that is being proposed within the existing historic structure we are preserving at 84 Society. What's more, the project proposes an additional 75 parking spaces to be set aside for public use with access to self-parking or valet drop-off, both of which are shielded from public view between the 2 buildings on George and Society. And all of that is a result of our site plan, which was devised really in order to mitigate traffic impact. Rather than entering the parking garage directly from the public right-of-way like a typical building, or as it is currently on the parking lot, we are actually proposing a driveway looping around the entire building, which can contain any traffic on the property itself. I reference this now because it was a critical decision we made early on in meeting with various neighborhood groups. And this led us to put that driveway, which reduced the width of the building proposed on George due to having driveways on both sides of it. And this brings us to my favorite part, architecture and design. We spent thousands of hours, tons of iteration, and years trying to figure out how to achieve our shared goals. And I'm really grateful to the project architects from Balcony Architects and Goff D'Antonio who have been instrumental to help make this all possible with such grace and creativity. It has been no easy task. We did not try to merely replicate the historic buildings of Charleston, but rather to draw inspiration from them in a minimal and contemporary way, while balancing the design with soft-edged, natural, and textured materials of extremely high quality and historical character. To continue that, I'd like to actually introduce Mark from Balcony Architects.
Okay. Wonderful. Thanks, Daniel. Daniel should have been an architect. So let's see. My understanding is that you're going to be, Tori, you're controlling the slides. I just simply say next as we go. Is that how I?
Sure. Lawrence Courtney is, but if you'll just say next, he'll
next. Okay, perfect. That's great. Okay, so, well, thank you. Again, my name is Mark Balcony. I'm the principal architect here at Balcony Architects. We're based out of Los Angeles, California. It's a pleasure to be here in Charleston, and I look forward to meeting you guys in person at some future opportunity here. But it's been a real pleasure to kind of look at Charleston and understand the sort of unique situation we have with such a unique historical fabric. So let's see. This slide is perfect. So what we're doing today is we're presenting two buildings, as Daniel mentioned, 29 and 35 George Street and 84 and 88 Society. So our George Street is proposing a 6-story, 96-unit apartment building with approximately 3,500 square feet of retail, restaurant on the ground level, and 3,000 square feet of restaurant and covered outdoor dining on the second floor. Society Street is designed, our Society Street project is designed as presented as a 7-story building with a 50-key hotel and 22 residential condominiums. I think one of the things also Daniel mentioned is that we're going above, I believe, 72 parking spots from our baseline, which I think is about 180 parking spots. Next slide. Great. So one of the sort of fun parts about working within Charleston is actually having some sort of historical context. I have a 400-year-old city versus Los Angeles, which is maybe about 150 in terms of its contemporary nature. But we took a closer look, kind of took inventory of what was sort of immediately adjacent. In particular, we have both our project that we talked about in the demolition permit earlier, and also we focused on 90 Society, which we're going to reference later when I sort of show you our site strategy. But you can see some of the, I guess, earlier versions of what was going on along the site. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial, just to give you an idea. As I mentioned, the portion here, the proposed for demolition, that's kind of highlighted in that lower corner. And then just as you know, the other piece to this puzzle is that our site also contains 306 King, which is this sort of extension. For the purposes of today, we're going to show you how that works in terms of site plan, but there's no real this doesn't really impact our specific scope other than the sort of site plan as we kind of work around. Next slide, please. And this kind of just gives you an idea of sort of the survey and how we attach that. So let's go to the next slide. So these are some contextual images kind of showing how the site, how it is you approach from both east and west and how it kind of comes off of King Street. Next slide. And so these have all been keyed in. You can see our existing historical building here, the theater company. Next slide. And these are sort of contextual images along King Street, which you guys are all familiar with. Next, please. So these are sort of contextual shots showing the site going from the inside into the out, kind of like what we had looked earlier with Tori in her presentation. Next slide. And this is sort of one of the things that we started off from a design strategy was to look at sort of the pattern and the precedence, pattern language in terms of how there's architectural detail is implemented throughout Charleston's architecture. And so these are some key examples that we kind of looked at initially. Next slide. And then we started to look at a more granular idea of like what's actually there in the contemporary culture. So this was from a visit that I think earlier or late last year that we came by the site and started to get a better sense of the scale of some of these details. Next slide. And so in this slide, this was meant to sort of understand how we might be able to take a more traditional pattern language and from the architectural vernacular of Charleston and somehow recontextualize it in a more contemporary manner. So how some of those elements, you can imagine that you could have sort of like a loggia or windows that could be a certain scale, but those windows maybe take on a different, more of a contemporary character. Next slide. And then we wanted to go through and sort of take reference of sort of contemporary projects that are built within the peninsula. We've noted there's sort of minimal palette from that respect, but I think there's a lot of successful examples that are already in place. And so we were kind of looking towards those in our ultimate scheme. Next slide, please. So I think maybe let's go to the next slide, which I think this is sort of the combined site plan, and this is what Daniel was alluding to. So the idea here is that our vehicular entrance would actually come off of, for Society and George, both projects, both buildings, would come in off of George Street, and then you would kind of circumvent, go along the back of the King Street vendors that are here, and then you would have this access road. It would all be one way. And so that access would essentially be a drop-off for the hotel. So it would kind of pull vehicular traffic off of the Society and push a lot of that onto George Street. That would then allow you to kind of loop along the building, kind of enter into the George side building. And then if we go back to the previous slide, Lawrence, please. Thanks. You can see that we're proposing a full subterranean parking structure that would straddle both parcels, or both streets in this case. Let's go back to the site plan. Great. Also, the other piece that Daniel mentioned earlier is the park. So the idea is that we would be using sort of the existing building along Society, the historical building, framing out the smaller building that we'll show you in some later renderings, 90s Society, which we thought was a really special building, and sort of framing that and creating this kind of urban plaza. So the lower level is kind of aligned with the historical building that's already there. And so we have this kind of esplanade that kind of connects you from basically from the drop off all the way to Society. So the idea is to really kind of create a space that's animated and lively. Next slide, please. And another sort of detail that we wanted to kind of bring out is, as the building, as we're proposing, particularly on Society, we're proposing this kind of wedding cake building that kind of sort of identifies each programmatic function of the project. So we have our existing building, then we actually have it projected back. The hotel is then pulled back on floors 2 and 3. Those are pulled back 10 feet. And then the condos levels, they're actually pulled back 16 feet off of Society. And you can kind of barely make it out. It's hard to tell there. And then the 7th floor is actually pulled back 48.5 feet from the street facade. So the idea for that is that 7th street, that 7th floor, pardon me, would be completely out of public view.
Mr. Batoni, we're at about the 12-minute mark. How much additional time do you need?
I can pretty much summarize this pretty quickly. How much time do we need? Sorry, we're presenting 2 buildings, so I apologize.
Okay, well, so they're 10 minutes per applicant. You can extend it for 5-minute periods. I'm pretty liberal about it. You just tell me how much more time you need.
I think I could do this in another 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Great, cool. Let's see, next slide, please. So these are some aerial shots just to kind of show the sort of proposed massing and how that kind of fits in. Let's go to the next slide. This was sort of a visual impact study. So one of the things that we wanted to be cognizant of was our relationship to King Street and its perceptibility from King Street. So these are kind of showing how our project, the massing kind of from King, is negligible in terms of its view from King. Next slide, please. So this is building A. So what we're looking at here is we kind of have this loggia piece, this 1-story, actually a 2-story piece here with our retail component, which is at the bottom piece. And then we have the sort of restaurant, terrace bar, which would be on the 2nd story. And then we have 4 levels of housing above that. The mass of the project is basically broken up into 3 pieces. So the 2 sort of main masses, and then sort of the middle connective piece, which is kind of an exterior condition, a breezeway to allow airflow into the courtyard. Next, please. This from perspective, this is kind of giving you both views, east and west from George side, kind of showing how our project sort of relates to the existing context. Next slide, please. And then this is what we're looking at on Society. So as you can see, we have our existing building, which is kind of on the 1st floor. And then we have our hotel, which is identified in floors 2 and 3. And then 4, 5, 6, and 7, those are sort of the piece that creates the cantilever. One of the reasons why we adopted this cantilever as an architectural element was to allow as much openness to the courtyard as possible. And so we wanted this to kind of become its own sort of encapsulated space. And I realized from this viewpoint, clearly this is from kind of the other side, from the other hotel. I don't think you'd actually be able to kind of see that. And if we look at the next slide, you can start to see how this starts to fit in towards the context. And then if we go one more, you can see actually from King Street, the project actually does start to kind of hide itself, particularly around the Dumas building, which I believe that building is right around 55 feet high. So it really masks that along the Society piece. Let's see, we can go to the next. And this is an aerial view, which I thought was interesting, given the scale of the project and plunking this into the site and looking at the greater context. You start to see that some of the building, the massing is kind of fits in with some of the other elements, particularly on the other side of King Street, as well as some of the things on our side. So I thought this was actually quite telling, where you'd imagine from an aerial perspective, this kind of starts to fit in. Next slide, please. And so we have sort of a material board for on building A, the idea that we would be using kind of high-end materials, looking at brick, metal panels, reinforced concrete in certain areas. Next. And then that same palette, a similar palette, just sort of remixed in terms of color and tone, that would be on the Society Street as well. Part of the idea from a design standpoint was to kind of create a more romantic ideal of the hotel component and still keep a kind somewhat of a contemporary nature to the total design. Next, please. Great. I don't know why this is blank. Okay. There we go. I think it's just a big file. And just so on a more granular, I think this is kind of good to see sort of how our entrance coming in off of George and how we're maintaining all of the uses for the King Street merchants from the backside. And so that's going to be a nicely articulated landscaped area that people can benefit on both sides of that easement going across. Next, please. And then these images, which I'm sure you guys have already had time to review, these are kind of the more just sort of nuts and bolts aspect showing how the building kind of works and performs. We can keep going. And then these are more of the straightforward architectural. We can kind of zip through these, I think. Keep going there. And so this shows you how that building along George, how it develops. It's a kind of a standard courtyard. One of the things too is that we've eliminated, at one point we had a 7th floor on this, we actually eliminated that. So now it's a 6-story building. And we can kind of move through those layouts and keep going. Again, and roof plan. I think now we're going to go over to the Society side, I believe. Or actually, I think these are going to be the exterior elevations. If they pop up. Great. Let's see, we can keep going through there. And I guess let's get to the Society side and kind of explain the ground level. I think it's a couple more here. These are the heavy ones. We can keep going. Here we go. All right. So can we go back one? Sorry, Lawrence. There's an image there, or at least there should be. Maybe it's not. Okay, we can go to the next one. Yeah, that's fine. Let's go to the one more to the ground level. And this is kind of where I'll leave you guys with. So the idea is this is kind of showing a more sort of zoomed image of how that park would actually work and how you can see how it's framing the 90s Society building and the brick building below there, and creating at the ground level here, this historic building would be converted into restaurant and retail. And then the lobby itself, all of that would sort of enter into the public courtyard. And so we think that this is actually a worthwhile public amenity. And we hope that, I guess you also feel that this is an important thing to bring to Charleston. The rest of the images that we have, these are more sort of straightforward architectural things. And I think that would be the conclusion of what we have to show.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baton.
Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Ms. Parrish, when you have a moment, I guess we can queue up live public comment.
Yes, we have 4 to speak publicly. I'll say you had 3 comments, written comments in your packet yesterday. Actually,
they're incorporated by
plus
reference.
Plus the letter from Anson Borough, and then you've got 4 public speakers. So we will start with Ms. Erin Megan.
Thank you. Erin Minigan with Preservation Society of Charleston. The Preservation Society would like to thank the applicant for reaching out to us on this project. We have appreciated their consistent dialogue, but are disappointed to not see our comments incorporated into the recent submittal. To preface our position, we do want to acknowledge positive moves being made, including retention of the historic building, incorporation of public green space, and use of a high-quality material palette. However, due to issues with height, scale, mass, and architectural direction, we are opposed to the project and feel it is incompatible with the site, context, and Charleston's broader unique character. We have less concern with the building facing George Street. However, feel the contemporary design presents a stark contrast to the highly traditional historic context. The architectural expression, including proportions and details, should be softened to better relate to the scale and character of nearby buildings on King and George Streets. Particular attention should be paid to the ground floor, where pedestrians will most experience the building, which currently has a highly modern treatment. Also, we would encourage studying a better location for the elevator to mitigate visibility of the overrun pop-up at the roof. On Society Street, our foremost concern is massing. According to the BAR principles, the authenticity of construction should be supported, and the architectural language of the building should be legible. We feel the proposal directly counters this principle of building tectonics, as the massing gets heavier as the building goes up. The approach of introducing separate, increasingly wider building masses compresses the historic building, presents a disjointed architectural expression, and creates an uncomfortable space underneath the heavy cantilever. This leads us to discuss issues with height. Located in the heart of the historic district, directly adjacent to the 2- and 3-story buildings of Lower King Street, this is one of the most sensitive sites to seek redevelopment in recent history. We must be diligent since this will have significant lasting impacts on the character of this area. Due to the high degree of architectural issues with the project, as well as its location within a highly sensitive, small-scale historic context, we cannot support additional height and feel a denial as submitted is the best course of action to allow for significant restudy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Minnick. Our next public speaker.
I'm gonna give you the next 2 names, but I also would like to put a little APB out for Colton Karch. I'm not seeing Colton in the attendees, so if you're out there, please raise your Zoom hand. And then next, we're gonna have Claire Norbert speak.
I see Claire muted presently.
Ms. Norbert,
I see
I see her. She's in there.
Claire, but somebody needs.
I'm sorry.
There
All
you
right,
go.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, terrific. Anyway, thank you for acknowledging me. My name is Norbert Clare. My wife and I currently live on 21 George Street. From my window right here, I can look out and see the parking lot. And the first thing I notice is even at this hour, there are 4 large vans that I doubt would fit in the underground parking area. So I think there are about 100 spots at least in that parking lot between Society and George Street. If I've got the numbers correct, it sounds like they're proposing 118 residential units, plus an unknown number of hotel units. So assuming that all these people have cars, where's everyone going to go? And on the height issue of the parking garage, there are several times when I've had to call a plumber or heating or air conditioning. Those trucks don't fit in underground garages. So I think this is going to make a very significant impact. So people that want to shop on King Street like that garage or that parking space. I don't know where they're going to go, because I think that the proposed parking is going to be occupied by tenants and hotel guests. I also like the previous speakers' comments on the modern structure of the proposed buildings. I think they're horrible, but that's just my feeling. But I don't think they belong in this historic district. And I'm not looking forward to any more construction delays. We just had a hotel built out of the shoe store on the corner of King and George. And I thought there was a hotel moratorium going on in Charleston. Anyway, I am not in favor of this project. And I wish to thank you all for your time and giving me the opportunity to voice my opinion.
Thank you. Further public comment.
Got Mr. Justin Schwebler.
Mr. Schwebler, you have the floor when you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is Justin Schwebler with Historic Charleston Foundation. I would first like to thank the applicants for meeting with us many times over the past few months throughout the development of this project. They've taken our comments and concerns into consideration throughout the process. And I would also like to mention that Historic Charleston Foundation owns and maintains an easement on 306 King Street. The design team has worked very hard to satisfy the requirements and limitations of that easement. We do, however, have some strong concerns with the project, and we've discussed these with the applicants prior to tonight's meeting. Building A on George Street, we find that the upper stories are too horizontally accentuated. The horizontal belt courses are too pronounced and make the building appear much heavier. Removal of these bands and inclusion of some delicate vertical detailing could help to lighten the building and add a more beneficial sense of verticality that follows the recommendations of the design guidelines. While we appreciate the minimalist contemporary design direction, greater attention should be paid to these levels to add more visual interest to the facade. Building B on Society Street is also an area of concern. Again, the contemporary architectural direction, high quality material choices, and dramatic architectural moves with the cantilever are appreciated. They also have given up substantial buildable area to incorporate a park space for the public, but we feel the building is currently far too oppressive over the historic storefront. While the design team did express their concerns with us about rearranging the massing, we feel that there needs to be a more significant relief between the new construction and the historic building. We recommend pushing the mass of the new construction away from the street by at least one bay to be flush with the rear of the historic storefront. This would also help to reduce the visible impact of the 6-story massing along Society Street. We recommend deferral of the application at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. We have one more live public comment, Ms. Perry.
I have not found that member of the public, and I haven't seen any, flagging of anyone. So I think that concludes the public portion.
Very good, thank you. So we will now move to city staff comments and recommendations.
Okay, we are having a bit of a technical difficulty with our file. Lawrence is looking for the staff comment page, but I'm going to start reading them if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay, number one, the largely underground parking is a positive for the project. Number two, the internal driveways are a positive for this project and will alleviate vehicular traffic on the streets. 3, regarding height, a finding of architectural merit and context is required. Applicant is reminded that the board has the authority to reduce the by right height by a half story. 4, applicant shall articulate the request for architectural merit and context. As a reminder, the ordinance per section 54-306, Article 17, defines architectural merit as a project that reflects exemplary architectural and urban design, utilizes the highest level of materials and finishes, and contributes to the public realm as outlined in the Board of Architectural Review principles. Number 5, staff does not find additional parking to be a contribution to the public realm in regard to a finding of architectural merit and context, as it necessitates additional volume to an already large building. Number 6, the application expresses there is a request for an additional floor via finding of architectural merit and context on the Society Street building only. The George Street building appears as 7 stories, however, and there is nothing in the ordinance related to story count as only being from the front elevation. The above ground and visible portions of building A consist of 2 stories of above grade parking with 5 floors above it and a shallow liner building across most of the front at George Street. Staff finds that the lobby mass does not sufficiently disguise what is 2 stories of parking. However, the lobby mass in combination with elevation revisions to the parking portions could potentially disguise what is 2 floors. 7, applicant's proposal requires a variance at the portion against George Street for a ground floor over 20 feet tall. BAR may grant up to 25 feet for the ground floor based on architectural merit and context. Number 8, regarding massing and scale, the cantilevering at Building B is a reverse in tectonics and is fundamentally unsympathetic and insensitive to its surroundings and to the proposed remnant element. Number 9, the general architectural expression for the George Street building, Building A, is foreign to the block, and while it consists of an interesting interplay of horizontal and vertical elements, its architectural language would be at odds with its surroundings. The general architectural direction for the Society Street building, Building B, of multiple expressions is likewise incompatible with its context. Number 10, the lack of a perceptible human scale at the George Street first floor is disconcerting. And number 11, perfect timing. Context is to be considered as part of a finding for an additional floor based on architectural merit. The context consists of a broad range of building topologies varying in height from primarily 3 stories to the west and north, with a similar street-to-street complex of 5 stories at mid-block, and with a variety of buildings 2 to 6 stories in height adjacent and to the south. The predominant character of the surrounding buildings is of a more traditional nature, exhibiting a higher surface to fenestration ratio with punched openings and heavier walls being the norm. Staff is recommending denial for height, scale, and mass and general architectural direction for buildings A and B.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. The applicant has a 5-minute rebuttal or clarification period. And I see Mr. Giuliani is raising his hand, so we'll get him unmuted in just a moment.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was raising the hand because I didn't realize that the rebuttal part was after staff comments. So I'll defer to Mark.
Okay, very good. Mr. Batoni, you have the rebuttal if you want to exercise it.
Yeah, I think this will also be with Daniel as well. But I think there was a couple of things, particularly in the call, I believe, the call-in referencing that the project was underparked. I believe in the staff findings that we just recited, it's actually the baseline plus the extra parking. So in this case, I would say that sort of idea should be mitigated. The other thing is that the larger buses, I believe, that were also in reference, were supplying loading zones for such larger equipment to move in and out of the site. I would also say, I think that part of the thing we were looking at sort of some of the architectural principles as well that are stated. We were looking at the idea of, particularly on the George Street facade, trying to understand that the main floor should actually be higher than the others. I think it's a baseline of a minimum of 14. In this case, we were actually going to 21 feet from that first floor to make that. So we were intentionally trying to create a higher ceiling to make a more gracious facade open to the street with more glass being able to look inside of it. In terms of, I believe some of the other comments on the George side in particular, we're looking at kind of like the horizontal banding. We thought that would actually be an advantage in terms of sort of breaking up the scale so it doesn't have this sort of monumental facade along that side. So I thought that the horizontality and breaking it up kind of broke up the building into kind of smaller chunks, which is something that is done in a number of historical references. This, I would agree, is a more contemporary take on that. Let's see, Daniel, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think I just heard something about the parking garage on George. We're referencing section 54.306, which says, well, first it says in section 7D that a single story on the first floor can be up to 20 feet. And then 13D says parking garages shall not exceed the height of the principal building. Parking garages shall not be constrained by floor-to-floor height requirements. So we could have just done a single level parking lot. It still would have been 20 foot high, but what we decided to do was just build a ramp in there for more parking spaces. It's not actually 2 legal stories by that definition, but I understand the city's comments about it looking like it. So I think we can definitely address that. And I think we should address that 100%. Because you can't see the side of the building due to the driveway wrapping around. I did hear about the car comment. I just want to be clear, we're actually building 326 parking spaces. I think we're only required to do around 200. So we're dramatically over parking because we do think that that will be a great benefit to our King Street neighbors and just the general neighborhood. And the driveway actually was designed to permit fire trucks, which are much larger than any of the trucks that are probably parked there in those regular standard spaces right now. So I hope that can alleviate that concern. When it comes to the south building, because some the comments regarding the massing and the cantilever, that really just comes down to a trade-off. The park is like I know we can't see it on the screen anymore, but that was a really big, important decision to try to maintain this big park, and not just as an afterthought, but as a really high functioning space. So we're actually, again, we're carving out a lot of building area that we could have otherwise done to kind of be in line with the tectonic principles. But as Mark said, we kind of did it in a different way. And along the front of society, we are stepping back. It's only along the side that there's a cantilever. But we do think it could create for something really dramatic and amazing in person, especially. And we kind of try to balance it with that romantic feeling of the arches and the French windows and a really high quality brick palette, which we had in the presentation, but it didn't actually come up on the screen, but there was actual images of them. I think that can help balance a lot of the contemporary design decisions as well. They're a much more of a historic nature. They're textured, they're earth toned, and they're not faux brick. Of course, that's a given. Let's see if I missed anything. I would just also think it's fair to say that I understand some people don't think the parking is a public benefit. It may not be to some, but I know for our neighborhood and a lot of our neighbors who support the project, particularly the business and retail owners on King Street, they see it as a massive public benefit, which keeps King Street lively, easy to access for people who don't already live in that neighborhood. So, we're really trying to do our best to preserve that. And that's, if the BR doesn't feel that's a public benefit, then, that's fine. But we actually thought we were doing something that is a huge public benefit, because it's certainly not cheap to drive all those additional parking spaces, especially with concrete prices the way they are these days. I think that's all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your time.
Yep, absolutely. We will now proceed to board commentary and potential vote on this agenda item. I'll open it up to my fellow board members.
I'll leave this one off if y'all don't mind. I understand that every major proposal represents hundreds of hours of time and drawing thought, and we do appreciate that as a board. We understand what's at stake with major proposals such as this. And the other thing I'll sort of say as preface is that every traditionalist is bound to believe that the BAR hates traditional architecture, and every modernist is bound to believe that the BAR hates modern architecture. And I've spent the last 15 years trying to convince people otherwise. It ain't gonna ever work. So keep that in mind as I offer my critique of this project. I hear what y'all are saying. You've studied the precedents, you studied the pattern and precedents of Charleston, but it seems to be that from a purely creative perspective, you took those patterns and precedents and used them as a point of departure to some distant destination that now has very little to do with the built environment in Charleston. What comes out of your study and out of this design, what appears on the paper is two buildings that I would say are very nearly antagonistic towards the historic architecture and urbanism of Charleston. And I'm not even going to address the request for the additional height, because even if you weren't asking for that, we would be saying these things. I actually called the city architect earlier this week to wonder why this project was on the agenda at all. It is so far off the mark from what we would normally accept as a board, in my view. And the comments that you received from staff are solid comments. I agree with them entirely. And I doubt that this is the first time you've heard them. And you have a right to appear before this board, but based off of what we've seen in this application, based off of what's been presented here tonight, and based off the staff comments we've heard, I think this project deserves a denial, not as a punitive measure, but so that the applicant can be clear about what we expect. Our ordinances are not foreign. So that's really all I'm going to say about this, because I don't think it deserves too much more critique than that.
Thank you, Mr. White. Further board comments?
This is Juliet Balcony. So everything what Jay just said is eloquent and right on the point. And I don't feel that we in a position even to expand the review of this project for the moment. And I would totally support the staff recommendations and comments, same as the public comments, and Jay as well. So that's kind of my position for the moment.
Thank you, Ms. Sobchak. Further board comments?
Mr. Chairman, I have no additional comments.
I think James Metters narrowly beat that out. So Kara, hold on just 1 second. I'll let James go first, okay?
Mr. Chairman, I have no additional comments.
Okay, well, that was quick. Ms. Wheeler, your turn.
Okay, I close this then. I think staff has already mentioned some of the positive portions of the of the project with the underground parking. I think 2 buildings could work here because you have two main elevations on George and Society Street, and also placing a plaza next to the existing building is helpful. But everything that's happening above the existing building seems to be overwhelming. The first messing might work if it was pushed back further, but then adding what looks like almost another building mass or another building on top of that cantilevers seems inappropriate for this portion of town and for Charleston. The applicant has shown some contemporary examples in the presentation, but all of those examples were either adjacent to a very large plaza, to Marion Square, or adjacent to larger open spaces. And here we just have a different, we have a very different context. We have very narrow streets, and while the main facades are not facing King Street, they will still probably be visible from further away just because of the height. So all 4 facades of each building, or all 3 facades of each building, will be visible, and they need the same amount of attention. I think what would be helpful is to really look at the streetscapes of Society Street and George Street on both sides, and not only have a model which the applicant has provided, it looks like, but really looking at the scale of each of those buildings, at the window openings, the patterns, the proportions, and then seeing how the new building will fit in. Other than that, I'll just echo that I don't think you need to replicate historic Charleston for this project, but if you choose contemporary architecture, it really needs to reflect the scale of the immediate context, the scale, the pattern, and the wall-to-window ratio that city staff has mentioned as well.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. I'm sorry, Ms. Wheeler, did you have more?
Other than that, I agree with staff comments and staff's recommendation.
Further board commentary. I think an applicant is entitled to hear, we've heard some specificity, but I want to add some more and adopt staff comments as my own, but go to a couple of them specifically. I don't think that a set aside of parking adds architectural merit and context And I agree with the comment regarding the volume for this large building. Additionally, I have issues with human scale. The most obvious issue I have is massing and scale, and that we have a reverse tectonic order in Charleston, which I'm not an architect like my fellow board members are, but I'm a Charleston architecture enthusiast, and you just don't see a lot of it. And so Mr. White used the term antagonistic. I won't go that far, but I would say it was a little jarring to see that reversal in tectonics, and I'm just not familiar with seeing a lot of it with other exemplars in Charleston. I would I'd also adopt comment number 10 regarding the human scale on the George Street elevation. And that I think that the building needs to be less alien to the context of the existing buildings around it. Note the applicant made a comment, I believe, and if I'm putting words in your mouth, I don't mean to at all, not trying to shade it at all, that parts of the building either blended in or faded into the background, or words to that effect. I think that the building from the street scale should be a pleasing building that people are impressed with the architecture of and don't feel that it needs, parts of it need to blend in or disappear, that it stands on its own merit. And so I'm adopting the express comments of the board, but would say most clearly that as to height, scale, and mass and architectural merit, I'm most alarmed or concerned about the reverse tectonics compared to what we normally have in Charleston, the volume of the building itself and how it presents itself on the rest of the streetscape. Further board comments?
May I add?
Yes, of course.
So the cantilevered portion of the hotel, I guess, on the Society Street feels extremely uncomfortable. And looking at that perspective, it's almost like that portion, it's almost will overturn and fall into the courtyard. That's such a, to me, is such uncomfort what I'm looking at. And why, I don't see it helps to open up the courtyard much, but the architectural elements on that part of the building is very contradicting each other as well, from bottom to the top.
Further board comment?
Yeah, that's it.
So I was going to introduce a motion for denial, but before I do so, I want to make sure, since this applicant may be sort of new to the Charleston Board of Architectural Review, what a denial might mean should the board pass that motion is that we would be looking for a fundamentally different approach to the architectural solution to your program. Taking all of these comments with due regard and really starting from a possibly entirely blank piece of paper. We have in the past seen applicants become confused by what a denial might suggest, and the reason that we might choose denial rather than say deferral is that we don't want you to think that just a tweak here and there, reduce the cantilever and give us less arches, that'll solve it. You've got a fundamental problem with your development proposal. So with that said, I'm going to introduce a motion for denial based off of incompatible height, scale, mass, and general architectural direction with board and staff comments.
Okay. Your motion, as I understand it, Mr. White, is for denial on the basis of height, scale, and mass, and for general architectural direction for buildings A and B, incorporating board and staff comments. Is that a correct restatement?
That's correct.
All right. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
There's a second by Mr. Metters. The motion is therefore proper. Ms. Sobchak, how do you vote on the motion on the floor?
Yeah, in favor.
Ms. Wheeler.
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters.
Yay in favor.
Mr. White.
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Okay. Thank you very much to the board and staff for their work on this agenda item. And I'm sure we will hear back from the applicant on steps moving forward. Agenda item number 6, Ms. Parrish.
All right, number 6 is 269 King Street, requesting conceptual approval of ground floor exterior alterations. The building is, one second. The building is noted as not rated, but I think I found, right, it's not rated. It's constructed prior to 1888 with some 1930s facade work and 1999 storefront work. It's in the old and historic district. Some context for you with the the little red flag showing where the building is, south of Wentworth and on the west side of King Street. This is the front elevation of the building showing the existing storefront. Then looking south and looking north and looking south. All right, and with this one, we have Mr. Charles Kane. I've got him here. He's being elevated right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kane, you have the floor when you're ready and have sound.
Hello, can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Lovely. Hello, everyone. And I want to thank Tori for her help and also Lawrence Courtney, and then give a quick hello to Jay. But here we are on King Street on the corner building. It's an interesting building that, of course, we all know it as the Gap building. And basically, this project resulted out of the subdivision of the first floor of the building into 2 tenant spaces and fire safety requirement. So we can go on to the next image. Just table of contents, a little bit of history, like Tori. Well, we'll go back there for just a second. As Tori mentioned, the building, as we understand it and can see it on the 1888 Sanborn maps, existed in some fashion structurally. However, what we understand, though we don't have specific documentation, is that this facade here, shown in the 1938 image, was modified when Efred's department store came to occupy the building. It was a Charlotte-based department store. They started expanding in the mid-20s. So you can see here, the same building, and we'll just keep on moving along. And the Gap, when they renovated the space in 1999, rebuilt the storefront on the first floor, which is the main component of this project. Some more context photos. The one on the, if we go kind of on the left side of this page, we see the building in question. The bottom left, we see the Masonic building across the street, which is being reworked currently. Over to the right side, you can see the storefront as it exists right now, very equalized panels of windows, and there's this singular recessed entry for the former entry to the Gap, and then off to the left is a recessed entry for the upstairs tenants. We can go to the next. Just line drawing of the context. All the buildings higgledy-piggledy. Next. And so you can see this hatched area is kind of dictating this change from whereas the Gap occupied this whole first floor space, which has an L or almost a strange T-shaped quality to it. The hatched is where the new tenant will be. We'll go to the next. the cross hatch, diagonal hatch, is where the two new entrances will be. And those represent kind of the 1/3 distance that's required for a sprinkler space. And the hatch that's going back is because the floor is slightly elevated from the street. So there will be a slight incline. And next. So just context, you can see that new dark black zigzag line is the division of the two tenant spaces. And then if we go to the next slide, we can see which is the items in consideration here. So in order to get these new doors in and keep them recessed off the streets, we have them partially recessed, kind of like the existing entrance to the former gap space, and then this very slight incline for them. Okay, next. And here's the building kind of in context, not too different from what it is now. Keep going. You can see basically we're taking out two of the existing window panels and trying to, in the most minimal way possible, though the storefront's not historic, integrate these new doors into that system. And next. And so we don't need a huge amount of we really don't need any quantity by these doors. So we have the minimal kind of width for the doors and just maintaining that kind of framed door with a single pane that was established in the existing double entry. Next. Okay, so you can see on the top left, the existing conditions, and then the main image is zoomed in. So it's not a huge visual discrepancy, but it will help with egress in the case of a fire. Okay, thank you. Next. And here we are, just more of a straight on elevation. And you can see in the top left what it was, these recesses here on either ends of the building, really kind of representing the main changes that we're proposing. And next. Thank you for your time. All right, I'll take
Thank you, Mr. King. Public comments, Ms. Parrish.
There's no public comment on this one.
Thank you. City staff comments and recommendations.
I have it. There's too many things right here. Okay. We've got one observation. The proposed work involves the modification of two doors in an existing storefront, which is to remain in order to accommodate two tenants on the ground floor. And the staff comments, number one, drawings indicate the new doors, if not reusing the existing doors, will match the existing in material and profiles. And two, the material to infill the areas of demolished floor areas is not specified. Applicant is to work with staff on the appropriate material for any exterior material change. We are recommending final approval with board and staff comments with final review of 4 permit drawings by staff.
Thank you, Tori. Mr. Kane, anything further from you?
That sounds good for me. I know that I'd talked to the client, at least on the exterior, of extending that blue stone into the recessed the new proposed recessed areas, but happy to work with the staff on that.
Thank you. Board comments. I'll start. Lawrence, can you go back to the picture of the Eford's department store from the 1930s? Yeah, okay. I just wanted a chance to look at that slide again. Thank you. Board comments on this agenda item?
Mr.
This is
Chairman.
Carol Wheeler.
Go
Can I
ahead, Carol.
give you now, James?
Yeah, no problem.
Just a quick question. Are you still planning to use the main entry door and use the other ones as egress doors, or is it you're going to abandon the main entry?
Yeah, the main entrance will stay. These two new doors are basically just required for life safety. So, I mean, the main double doors will still be the main entrance. The two new ones will basically, hopefully, kind of shown by the presentation, blend into the background and only be used as necessary.
Okay, thanks.
Further board comments?
Mr. Chairman, I am in opposition to the modification of the storefronts in order to create two tenant spaces. That's all I have.
Yeah, that's the reason I went back to the Eford's picture. It's unclear from the picture that's there what it looked like exactly in 1930, but if we're deferring to assuming that the current iteration of the facade, which being familiar with Eford's department stores, is a very popular model in that particular color brick and style in the 1920s and 30s. You can see it all over the Southeast. Eford's was a Charlotte-based department store chain. But there in Columbia, what became the Lurie's building all over, this very common facade, much like a Woolworth's, where these older buildings are retrofitted. I'm aware that it's a challenging issue that kind of has interface with zoning and some coding issues, but I would be opposed to the modification without clearer evidence of what the facade looked like with Eford's renovation in the late 1920s, early 1930s.
Well, I'll jump in here. If I understand correctly, the storefront that we're talking about is not historic. Do we have any evidence of that, or to the contrary? Maybe Tori can clarify that.
Staff about that.
So I've looked a little bit into this, and that's why I rely on Mr. Kane. Well, that's where I got the information about the storefront, that what you see there was modified in 1999 for the Gap.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't confirm that.
Okay.
It wouldn't be surprising. Go ahead. Sorry.
I apologize, Jay. And you can go ahead and finish your comment.
Well, so the issue here is that you're actually seeing modifications proposed because the way in which the building is being used is changing. When it was a department store, it was a single tenant occupancy. The city's actually taken additional steps in recent months to encourage the occupancies of the upper floors on these blocks of King Street, which sort of inadvertently were prohibited by zoning. And if you're gonna occupy those upper floors, then you're gonna need to provide a separate means of ingress and egress for those tenant spaces. And the fact that we're fitting doors into the existing module of what is probably not a historic storefront is, I think it's a pretty sensitive approach. If I'm comfortable with this, understanding the scope of the project and its intentions, and I don't think that we're really unraveling the history of King Street by making these modifications, especially if we understand that the storefront was modified in the 1990s for a previous tenant.
So, Mr. Chairman, let me follow up on what Jay said a little bit. There's not enough information here to know what is factual, because I certainly agree with what Jay said. I have not seen appropriate level of documentation in order to take a position that I would feel comfortable approving this. However, Charles could certainly provide us with that documentation. So maybe this is not an up or a down, but a deferral for additional information.
Yeah, and actually, I would agree with James there. And Charles, I would like to give Charles the opportunity to respond in just a second. So this will be a question to him. But I guess what I would say is that if we know that there was some modification specific to the 1990s when the gap moved in there, and we have documentation of what that modification was, then this gives me less heartburn. But I feel like I need to know if there are photographs or context photographs anytime from the 1920s to the 1990s to know what the nature of the modifications were and how extensive the modifications were at that time. It's interesting to me that in the 1990s, there could have been a specific and significant renovation to the facade that the BAR approved, but they may have.
Do you mind if I
don't know.
Yeah, do you mind if I interject? I pulled this architectural survey card the other day, and it's so shadowy underneath there. I didn't zone into some of this, but
Okay.
I can share it. It's from 1973.
Okay, sure.
Lawrence, I'm trying to figure out how to. You may have to stop sharing first.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, let me say that I think this should be on the burden of the applicant, and not during this meeting getting Tori to do research to present. But
Right.
It's just a comment.
No, I understand.
Well,
You having difficulty pulling it up?
yeah, I've got it open on my screen. I just can't share it with you all.
I am making you host right now.
Okay. You may have to stop sharing though.
Okay.
Okay. All right, let me try. Okay, hold on. Why does it keep closing itself? I'm trying this one more time. I'm sorry. This is so weird. It doesn't show up on my I got one more idea. Hang on. Okay. I don't know. I'm sorry. I can't get the photograph to share. But I can share anything else with you right now.
That's okay. Let's make sure we don't get any more sideways in terms of hosts, et cetera. So you might push it back to launch so we don't have an issue on the next agenda item. Further board comment or motion?
I actually think that I was just wondering to myself, this is such a small application to a not very old building. If staff is uncomfortable, or if my fellow board members are uncomfortable granting approval for this right now, it is possible, although it seems a little counterintuitive, to defer something but kick it to staff to resolve with the applicant. And so I throw that out there as an option, because a project of this small stature really is a little too granular, to use previous applicants' lingo, for us to spend a heck of a lot of time on.
So I throw comfortable with that.
I disagree.
Just to throw that out
I think
there.
looking for that documentation for our applicants is what we should be looking for. And if and that should start with, if it's going to come to the board, then it should come with the appropriate documentation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm suggesting that we could defer it, but then also say that it would deferral with final review by staff. That way, they have to come back with that documentation. They have to depict that to the city architect. So I'll just go ahead and introduce that motion and see how it flies. for a motion for deferral with final review by staff with board and staff comments.
Mr. White, your motion is for deferral with final staff approval, incorporating board and staff comments. Did I restate that correctly?
That's right.
Okay. Is there a second?
I did second.
That was not a second. Lou, do you wanted to comment? You want to
Yes.
comment on the motion?
No, I'm seconding that. I'm totally agree with Jay.
Oh, you are seconding that. Okay, very good.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So we have a motion and a second. The motion is proper. I'll proceed to call the roll. Ms. Wheeler, how do you vote on Mr. Metter's motion? I mean, Mr. White's motion.
Yeah, in favor.
Ms. Sobchak,
Yeah, in favor.
Mr. Metters,
Nay, not in favor.
Mr. White,
Yay, in favor.
and myself opposed, but it passes 3-2. Thank you, and thank you to the applicant.
Could I make a comment or a question?
Sure, Mr. Kane, go ahead.
Ask a question. So when we were, I'd be happy to provide those Old Navy drawings that were, or not, sorry, not Old Navy, Gap. Drawings from 1999. I'm sorry for not including those in the presentation, where they ostensibly rebuilt the storefront, though we don't quite have photos. So maybe I should do a bit more research on that. A question for the way that the two new doors are proposed. Originally, when I was talking to the city about this, we had wanted to keep the doors in plane, the two new egress doors in plane with the old existing storefront, so that the new doors basically took up the whole kind of 50-inch width of those panes of glass. There was a bit of pushback on that because of the doors swinging out into the sidewalk area. And so that's what resulted in the recessed doors, which I do think has a very different appearance. I would agree with that from the 30s Effords department store. However, based on those comments, we recessed the doors in what we thought was as sensitive as a way as we could, while still trying to maintain the majority of the storefront as it was. So I'd be curious to hear if you had any recommendations on that, or we could follow up after the fact, because this is
So, Mr. Kane, I appreciate the spirit in which you said those comments, and I wish we'd gotten those ahead of the motion. I don't think we can rule on those now. The good news for you is that this has been deferred to you and the staff to resolve in terms of the documentation from the 30s to the 90s and what actually happened with this gap renovation. And I'm sure you can work that out with staff, but I will just note for the benefit of staff that I think that Mr. Kane had a very good observation on the composition of the facade without ruling specifically on that or making a board and staff comment. Mr. Kane, you now have the liberty to get a final approval on that from staff based on a motion. Okay.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Agenda item number. We had a whirlwind.
All right, Lawrence, now I can share my screen, but now I don't need
Okay.
to. So you'll take it
All
over.
right. Wait, if you will make me host,
Oh, gee.
then
Okay.
I can.
Sorry about that.
That's what I'd warned about.
Hold on. Okay. Well. Okay, you're host.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Introduce number 7.
And does everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good. So now we are off to the races.
All right, 89 to 95 Cannon Street is requesting preliminary approval for the construction of a new mixed-use building on Cannon Street with a variance request for the first floor height and the construction of 4 row homes on Carrera Court. This one's in Cannon Borough, Elliott Borough, Height District 2.5 to 3, Old City District. Some contacts to familiarize you. That's Cannon Street above the project, north of the project, running left to right. This is the project. We're in the street looking south. The building at the back was approved for demolition a few months ago. And looking west on Cannon, looking east. And we've got Mr. Stephen Ramos, who I forgot to elevate. Okay, I can't do it now. Now that I'm not host anymore, I can't make people.
See if
All
Laura
right.
wants a moment to do it.
Okay. There are a lot of people still on this call.
Maybe I should have been co-host.
I believe you are. Okay,
I'm just me now.
now this drama should be.
Yes, can you guys hear me? This is Steve Ramos.
We can, Stephen. Good. You have the floor when you're ready.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is the project we call Cannon Row. It's at 89 through 95 Cannon Street. We were fortunate and grateful to receive conceptual BAR approval, and the project was very well received. That being said, there were some great critiques and comments, which I will address at the beginning of the presentation. Next slide. Next. Okay, so the first several slides deal with the comments from the previous BAR. Got the comments listed on the left, and we have written a response to each one of those comments. In interests of time and preserving people's interest in the project, I'm not going to read all those comments. I'll simply just address the particulars when we see the images. Next. Next. Okay, this was the first key revision. Mr. Bello made a comment last at Conceptual BAR that the building seemed a little squat and that the ground floor might be better if it was taller. So the image on the top is a revised north elevation. Made several subtle changes, such as increasing the height of the windows, increasing the height of the transoms, as well as inching the ground floor up 8 inches. It was 14 feet, now it's 14.8. And to keep the overall building height the same, we removed 4 inches from levels 2 and 3. And those series of changes, as well as increasing the height of the pilasters, I feel like did improve the proportions. So that was a great comment. Next slide. And just so you can see the before and after in 3D, again, the new on the top with the slightly taller ground floor, and then the image on the bottom with the slightly lower. And proportions are a funny thing. You can tweak things just a few inches and it does make a difference. Next. Another comment also suggested by board member Eddie Bello was to study siding on the project. This project is skinned completely with stucco on CMU block, and it was suggested that siding might be looked at because the Elliott Borough, Cannon Borough neighborhood is predominantly siding because it's predominantly residential. I think that the building could be siding. I think it could also be brick, but I would still prefer to keep it as a stucco building. I think that it has a substantial look to it. I think it will distinguish itself from the historic architecture. And for maintenance and durability, it is also our preferred strategy. So For all those reasons, we are still proposing a stucco building. Next. One other comment that was noted, if you look at the image on the left, we had kind of jogged the facade of the row homes just to break up the mass. And it was commented that maybe that wasn't necessary and that it was a bit arbitrary. And so we looked at it, we straightened it out, and I like it. I like the straightened facade. I do agree that maybe it wasn't necessary. And in some ways, I just think the proportions are better without that jog. So you'll see the image on the right addresses that comment. Next slide. So this is preliminary BAR, and as such, the details are what are being presented and reviewed. I felt like the storefront design was the most critical detail for this project. I've had the pleasure of working on numerous storefronts on King Street in my time in Charleston. And when I would do that, I would look at buildings on King Street. But in this case, being in the Cannonboro, Elliottboro neighborhood, I looked at local precedents to the neighborhood and was quite pleased to find a lot of really wonderful details, as well as variety around. And so this is just kind of a study of looking at what makes these storefronts. Next slide. And here are a few more. The top row are recently renovated or new storefronts. And there's some really exuberant and highly detailed things happening. And I think that's really wonderful because that's at the street level where people really appreciate detail like that. The images on the bottom right are the Vendu Hotel. And I included that only because of the windows. You see there are operable windows that open like doors. And that's what we are proposing at the ground floor restaurant facade to really activate the facade. The only difference is the doors or windows we are proposing are much taller and lower to the ground, so that they're much more open than what you see at the Vendu. Next. This is the overall site plan for the project. Next. And this is a comparison of the previous floor plan on the left and the new floor plan on the right. And just briefly, for those that weren't at the previous meeting, this project has the mixed use building on Cannon Street, which you see in that kind of pink color. And then there are the 4 row homes on Carrera Court. The only real noticeable change in plan would be that I removed the jog in the row homes and made a few revisions to the stair and elevator design in the commercial building. Also, we think now that instead of having retail and restaurant, we are likely to just have one restaurant. So there's one less door on Cannon Street. Next. This is the second floor plan. No really substantial changes. Next. Same thing with the third floor. The row homes are 2.5 stories. So what you're seeing there is the floor plan is cutting through the roof. Next slide. And here are the roof plans. We have placed rooftop condensers. I have studied them at just long distances and angles and do not believe that they will be visible due to the parapets and the setbacks from the street. Next. Here are the comparison elevations. We've already looked at this one a good bit, so we can move on to the next one. This is the Carrera Court, which is a narrow alley. The only noticeable difference would be that the row homes no longer have the jog. And I've tweaked the stoop design just a little bit. They now have arches as opposed to flat recessed niches. Next. This is the west facade. One of the comments from Mr. Metters at the previous VAR was that if you look at the bottom left, that the ground floor facade had a lot of blank wall and that the storefront ended rather abruptly. So we've tweaked it a bit. We've made the storefront larger. It's now a 10-foot module that's exactly what the front of the building is. And just added one opening to the garage with a nice decorative header. And that definitely helps break up what would be a blank facade. Next. This is the south facade of the commercial building, which is piazzas. The elevator shifted, so it's no longer perfectly symmetrical, which will keep me up at night, but I think it'll still be a very attractive porch, even so. Next. This is the south facade of the row homes. We added a little break in the plane to create some localized symmetry around that gable. Next. And this is the north facade. One of the staff comments at the last meeting was that they liked that we had created this plane change in the facade, but asked that it be increased to at least 8 inches. And so that's exactly what we've done. We've recessed that plane to 8 inches. And you'll notice that the chimney is substantially taller. After really digging into the building code and looking at that chimney, we realized that it wasn't tall enough. It needs to be 24 inches higher than any building element that's within 10 feet. And so because of that, it had to extend up beyond the peak of the roof. Next. This is the streetscape elevations. Next. Next. These are the overall building sections. Next. And these are the details for the project. I mentioned that the storefronts are very important. We've studied storefronts that are in the area as mentioned, and tried to introduce some things that are a little unique. Our plan is that the paneling that sits below the storefront will be a CNC cut milled panel to get almost a relief pattern. So that's one unique thing we're doing. I mentioned that we will have the operable windows, and in fact, they're really just doors is what they are, but they're at a window height. And most of the materials down at this level are painted wood. The windows are aluminum clad wood, so that they really hold up over time. Next. This is the pilaster details. Again, that the building is CMU block. We changed to 6-inch block below the windows to get some extra depth. Next. This is what a typical window looks like. In an effort to get the windows nicely recessed, we are using wood blocking. So if you look at the jamb detail at the bottom, you'll see we've pushed 2x4 blocking back as far as we can so that we can return the stucco approximately 3 inches into the jamb opening. Again, these are aluminum clad wood windows. The commercial building will have true working wood shutters. The windowsills are being made by concrete brick that we are then covering with stucco. So it'll appear to be one unit, but it is in fact brick. The headers, the plan to create that shape and the depth is by using cement board that we stack. And then again, that cement board will also be covered in stucco. That's a technique we used when we were working on the 332 King Street building, formerly Bob Ellis. Next. This is the detail up at the cornice, the top cornice. It's about a 2-foot overhang. Once we get up to this height, actually at the window jambs and at the cornices that are up high, we are using fiber cement trim wherever possible for maintenance and durability reasons. And since it's all going to be painted, I don't think anybody will ever know the difference. The corbelling, as of now, is actually planned to have structural capabilities. We are going to be stacking 2-bys and cutting those shapes out of them, and then doweling them together to create the more chunkier pieces of wood. And I've specifically kind of picked a more contemporary and kind of clean looking corbel shape, again, as another way to somewhat distinguish this building from some of the more historic buildings in the neighborhood. Next. And here are the porches. Next. So the fascia boards on these porches, again, will be fiber cement. And it should be noted that these are on the back of the building. The railings are all wood, the columns are wood, and then they'll have trim elements that some will be, if it's a flat panel, we're using fiber cement. If it's something that has a profile, we're using wood. Next. And these details are all very similar. Just the one difference is that the height of the fascia changes. Next. And then this is the top of the porch. Next. These are details through the stoops that are on Carrera Court. They're going to be cast concrete poured in place. The walking surfaces will be brick. One thing that I realized we missed on this, the concrete surfaces will all be covered in stucco, even though these details don't show that. We just forgot to put that on there. The railings will be mild steel, which is effectively a contemporary version of wrought iron. Next. This is the Juliet Balcony, which will be made out of tube steel. We tried to get those tube shapes as small as possible. And the intent is that this whole unit will be built in a shop, galvanized and painted, and then installed all in one piece. Next. And just a few more window details. The only difference at the row homes is that they don't have shutters. Next. This is just some material call outs as well as a color study. I'm never very good at color, so this is just the first pass, but it has the general intent of what we're looking for. Next. And then this is the row homes, which are a little more muted and a little more contemporary, I would say, with the way, with the black and the white and the gridded windows. Next. So this is the last slide I'll show. We are requesting preliminary BAR approval. Because we have increased the height of the ground floor in the 2.5 to 3-story height district, ground floors are limited to 14 feet. However, the board does have you do have the ability to permit higher ground floors. And I believe it is warranted with this project. There is precedent for tall ground floors in the neighborhood. The height increase, I believe, creates a better proportion overall. And we maintained the overall building height by taking height out of the other floors. And this was a request that was made by the board members to study the ground floor. So I hope you'll consider that, because I think it is helpful to the project. And I think we've answered all of the previous comments. And so with that, I ask for preliminary approval and am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. Very thorough presentation. Public comments, Tori.
So we have Miss Erin Milligan.
Thank you. Erin Minigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. The Preservation Society would like to again thank the applicant for reaching out to us on this project. We continue to be supportive of the project and feel the proposal presents an appropriately scaled, compatible infill project that will contribute to the character of the context. There was discussion at the previous meeting about appropriate material palettes for the context, and we feel the project as proposed presents the best option. Therefore, we urge the board to grant preliminary approval and look forward to seeing this project move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Milligan. Further public comment?
We also have Mr. Justin Schwebler.
Okay.
Thank you. This is Justin Schwebler with Historic Charleston Foundation. This project continues to develop nicely. We'd like to thank the applicant for reaching out to us again to review the project. We feel that this appropriately scaled project will be a great addition to the C&E neighborhood and the Cannon Street streetscape. We recommend preliminary approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. Is that it for public comment, Tori?
That concludes public comment.
Very good. City and staff comments and recommendations.
One observation, the project has changed in primarily subtle ways and continues to improve. Staff comments number one. The only thing staff finds any issue with involves the clearly articulated base of the building along Cannon Street, where it abruptly stops at the east and west side elevations. This may occur to accommodate what is occurring, at the rear of the building, but this may be better handled. Number two, the alignment of and further articulation of the row houses are improvements. And three, there are enough details to give a good sense of the project's composition and materiality. We are recommending final approval with board and staff comments, with final review by staff of 4 permit drawings.
Okay. Any further response from Mr. Ramos?
Sure, I'll be brief. Thanks to Preservation Society, Historic Charleston, and city staff for the kind words. I did want to address the articulated base of the building because that's a great comment. If you could back up about 5 or 6 slides from where you're at, I just wanted to show a couple images. Keep going. One more. Yeah, that's perfect. So the comment is that perhaps the base should continue more around the sides. And I think maybe I've become too much of a slave to precedent, but I do look at buildings around town, and I do notice that they often, the storefronts, they are less of a continuous base or podium, and they're more like a bite out of the building. So they often turn the corner and then they just stop. And so I think that is what I've done is similar to like the images we see here. That being said, perhaps a very flush cornice that kind of continues the datum of the base is something that could be looked at to extend that. But I think also it could be just fine as it is. But I'm open to suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. Board comments and a potential board vote on this item.
Mr. Chairman, I like the stucco on the block. I like the height increase on the first floor. I like the project overall, and I plan to support its final approval tonight with my vote.
I would just join your comments, Mr. Metters, and say that raising the first floor storefront and making the second and third floors slightly reduced in proportion has worked very well in this project. It's a good exemplar for others dealing with this particular challenge. And the wrapping or the lack thereof of the facade where it stops around the corners does not particularly concern me, especially in light of the precedents that Mr. Ramos was able to show us. Further board and staff comments. Board comments.
I agree.
That was a briefing from Mr. White. Okay, Ms. Sobchak.
Yes, and I guess I will repeat what everybody just said, but the stucco is much more appropriate for this building. In my mind, it gives much more stature to it. And particularly when we have on the corner of the, Rutledge and Canon, the stucco building. The height of the first level is much improved. And I actually like the turn of the base to the sides and how it's rendered. I think it's appropriate and works really well. So I'm in support of the approval.
Further board comment.
This is Carol Wheeler. I agree with my fellow board members as well, and would make a motion for final approval with board comments. Final approval with staff comments 2 and 3, and board comments with final review by staff and approval of increased first floor height as presented.
Okay, your motion, Ms. Wheeler, as I understand it, was for final approval incorporating board and staff comments 2 and 3 with final review by staff for permit drawings. Is that correct?
Yes, and the approval of the increased first floor height as presented, which we should include just for zoning purposes.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, Ms. Wheeler's motion, Mr. White has seconded. I'll run down the roll. Ms. Subcheck, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay in favor?
Mr. Metters,
Yay in favor.
Ms. Wheeler,
Yay in favor.
Mr. White,
Yay in favor.
and myself, yay in favor. Congratulations to the applicant. We'll look forward to working with you to getting this building down the stretch.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 8 has been deferred. Tori, when you have a moment, you can move to agenda item number 9.
Right, we're moving to 609 King Street. While Lawrence gets the slides ready, this one is requesting conceptual approval for a new senior living facility. It's also in Cannon Borough, Elliott Borough, Height Districts 4 and 6, and in the Old and Historic District.
So we'll wait for Lawrence to get the slides caught up, and we have Mr. Gow joining us this evening.
There we go.
Very
All right,
good.
we've got context if you need to be familiar with this.
I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off, Tori.
Okay, we've got some elevations from King Street. This is the Remnant building that's been approved for partial demolition and relocation to the south. We are looking south now. Looking northeast. North. And with this one, you know what? I need to let everyone in, and I can't. Lawrence, you'll have to let everybody in.
Lawrence, you're currently muted. But if you can, we're trying to let Mr. Gow, I see Mr. Gow now.
He should be in.
He is. Thank you, sir. And then I see Mr. Gramley, Mr. Allen, and Ms. Miller just appeared. Mr. Gow, if you hear us.
Sir, can you hear me?
We can. Let me know what your batting order on this project is.
We are having Mr. Parker and Mr. Brewer join us as well.
Okay. Who would like to start?
Are they on?
Mr. Brewer is appearing and shown as unmuted, as is Brooks Johnson. And you just a moment ago, and now Mr. Scott Parker.
Great. Can you all hear me?
Mr. Parker, we can. If you're whoever wants to start.
Wonderful. I will start this evening. So my name is Scott Parker with Design Works. And with all due respect and acknowledging the late hour, I would like to request some additional time for our presentation this evening.
Certainly.
Wonderful. Thank you.
How much? And I'm not, as you know, I'm glad to give the time as needed. How much extra time do you believe we need?
I would request up to 30 minutes. Hopefully we'll be shorter than that.
30 minutes for the whole presentation?
Yes, sir.
Well, let's do this. I'll give you the initial 20 and let you know when you've hit that, and you can tell me what you additionally need. Fair enough?
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
So a quick aside, when my family and friends asked me today what my plans were for my 64th birthday, I replied, I can think of nothing better to do than to spend the evening coming before the BAR.
Well, happy birthday, and I hope that's not
Happy
too
birthday.
Thank you so much. So with that, I'm speaking this evening on behalf of the entire development team and the design team, which includes Liberty Senior Housing, Evening Post Industries, Robert Stern Architects, LS3P Associates, Design Works, and Seaman Whiteside. I'll be assisted this evening in the presentation by Gary Brewer from Robert Stern Architects. We will present to you how we have responded to the board and staff comments from our previous time before you in January, beginning with King Street, then Spring Street, then St. Philip, and concluding with a new alley to the north. We want to publicly acknowledge city staff, the Historic Charleston Foundation, and the Preservation Society for their time and suggestions as we refined the design. Their input has been invaluable. Next slide, please. So rather than read all the previous comments, we've paraphrased and organized them by street. So staff and board comments with regard to King Street: tone down, simplify, refine detailing of the facade. Take clues from the orphan house: well-proportioned dormers, symmetry, rhythmic, straightforward, repetitive. With regard to the historic remnant, demonstrate sympathy to the historic remnant in the overall design. Study the intersection of the relocated building remnant with the new building, and express the sidewalls of the building depth approved by the board in an authentic manner. Next, please. In the plan, we have relocated the historic remnant of 609 King a little further to the north than was previously shown. And we've redesigned the northern wing of the building to have the same horizontal dimension as the remnant. More detail on this in a moment. Obviously, the historic remnant aligns with King Street, but in response to board comments, we've also aligned the northern wing with King Street. This new alignment means that the walls of the entry court are no longer perfectly symmetrical. Next, please. So the before elevation is at the top and the after elevation is at the bottom. You can see the remnant of 609 and how its dimension actually defines the dimension of the northern wing as well. Next, please. At this point, I'll turn it to Gary.
This is Gary Brewer from Robert Stern Architects. So before rendering on the top and the proposed rendering on the bottom, and you can see how the plan change with the historic remnant moving north allows us to have symmetrical wings that are bilaterally symmetrical to the center line of the courtyard. You can also see the simplification of the facade with the repetition of simple windows. This is achieved by moving the balconies to the north and south. Next, please. And here is the proposed. We have also slightly reduced the height of the center tower based on staff and board comments. You can see again the simple repetition and the simplification of the facade. Next, please. Here you can see how with the historic remnant moving north, that its width defines the wing of the building above it, which is set back. And from that width of the historic remnant, we duplicate that on the north side so that that remnant is informing the entire project with its width. Next, please. Scott.
So with regard to the historic remnant, the new position allows for a larger interpretive alley to the south and greater exposure of the southern wall. So buildings on King Street are proud to the street. They align with the street without setbacks. They form a continuous street wall. The northern wing respects this alignment with no setbacks. For the southern wing, the larger mass of the new building is actually set back 13 feet. This deviation from what is typical to King Street is in response to the historic remnant. We studied many options. A larger setback we felt lost the presence of the street wall, and a lesser setback diminished the reading of the remnant. Next, please. The new position enables the sidewalls on the north and south to be exposed for a full 25 feet. And the sidewalls also terminate into a perpendicular wall of the new building. As 609 was deemed worthy for its cultural significance as neighborhood retail, and in discussions with staff and the historic groups regarding adaptive reuse, we're actually proposing 2 punched openings in the northern wall. This will enhance the neighborhood retail operations proposed to go there. Next, please. We look carefully, as requested, at how the remnant will attach to the new building. The side walls terminate into a perpendicular wall where there's a hyphen, and the hyphen will express the roof drainage that occurs from the remnant. Next, please. We've moved the porches from the King Street facade to the sides of the building where they face now the entry court. Next, please.
So,
Gary?
In conclusion, you can see the significant changes that were made, simplification of the facade, moving the remnant to make it more important with a wider interpretive alley that makes the southern wall of the remnant more visible, and the overall simplification of the facade and the lowering of the tower. Next, please. The view down Columbus Street has pretty much stayed the same. Next, please. And here you can see a closer view with the changes that were described. Next, please. And a close-up showing the simplification of the 2 wings and how they are now bilaterally symmetrical with the courtyard. Next, please.
So go ahead, Gary, sorry.
So here you can see the before and after, and how with the remnant moving north, the wings facing King Street are now symmetrical. And by moving the remnant to the north, we now end up with a wider, smaller courtyard to the south that really features and shows off the southern portion of the remnant. Next, please. And here you can see it in an overall elevation. Scott, I think this is your slide.
Yeah, so in this enlargement, you can see the 13-foot setback in response to the remnant. And we feel that the mass of the larger building behind it is still able to hold the street wall, which we feel is really important. Next, please. So before and after from the north. Next, please. And the northern wing really takes clues from the historic remnant. There's now 3 bays of retail, and actually you can see the window on the side as it heads down the alley. Next, please. So we feel the new design is sympathetic to the remnant, and that the remnant actually informs much of the design of the new building. And we feel the new building design expresses a rhythmic, straightforward, and repetitive design in keeping with many of the qualities of the orphan house that the board emphasized. Next, please. So now we're going to move to Spring Street. Basically, you asked us to start over, to come up with a new direction. And in that new direction, to be sure that we respect the scale of the historic buildings to the west, including their floor height. And you also asked us to address the vehicular entry. Next, please. So you can see the before on the top and the after on the bottom. Next, please. And so the new approach establishes a wing of the main building that is set back from the Spring Street right-of-way by 45 feet. The wing is designed with the same brick and basic fenestration of as the main building. Forward of the 45-foot setback is a new attached structure that is in keeping with the scale and proportions of the historic structures to the west. To the east of the new structure is an entry garden court designed with traditional paving and plantings to feel like a Charleston garden. The garden court pulls the point where vehicles move under the main building 45 feet from the back of the sidewalk. Views through that opening will terminate on the entry to the main building, which occurs in the center of the block. Next, please. So here again is a view of the new scheme within its context. Next, please.
So here you can see the proposed scheme up close. What has changed significantly is the lowering of the height of the building on Spring Street, so that it is no longer having the ground level having the same floor-to-floor height as the rest of the project. This allows us to make it more in scale with the adjacent houses to the west. The building behind it has been rendered in all brick and is now at 5 stories, and its wing to the right has been pushed farther back. Moving up the building, the 6-story portion has been pushed to the east, so you will see in the rendering that is not all that visible, and then the upper level, the 7th floor above it. Next, please. Here, this shows the changes from what was proposed at the top to what is currently being proposed with the 20-foot and the 40-foot, 44-foot setback and the elevations on the right and left. Next, please. And here you can see the overall dimensions of the new mass and the new scheme. The idea is to have the building on Spring Street rendered perhaps in clapboard, with the building behind it, the taller building behind it, being in brick and more in keeping with the rest of the project. And you can see the 3, the 5, the 6 stories and the 7 stories that have been changed to lessen its height, scale, and mass and impact from the west. Next. Before view, next. And then the earlier proposal on the left and the right, which has been lowered in height and pushed farther back from Spring Street and is being rendered in a mostly brick palette. Next, please. And here you can see the various setbacks showing how far back the new design has been pushed from Spring Street. Next, please. And then a close-up. Next, please. Scott.
Yep. So this is a view from the looking to the west. Next. And in the proposed view, we feel the new approach helps mediate the scale of Hoffler Place with the buildings and the other buildings of the urban core with the scale of the neighborhood buildings to the west. The mass of the larger wing is pulled back 45 feet and virtually not visible from the street unless you're looking straight on. Next, please. So let's move to St. Philip Street. Next, please. Staff and board comments with regard to St. Philip. Restudy the scale of the building elements to be sure they fit with the context. Use a consistent window and shutter treatments. Siding is inappropriate for the larger building. And be sure that the courtyards align. Next. So before on the top, after the new proposal on the bottom. And we're going to start with talking about the smaller buildings that are immediately on St. Philip Street. Next, please. So the new design takes clues from the commercial structures on St. Philip Street, most notably the bank building to the north, which is just to the left of the little purple building there. And we use those clues to really address the healthcare building, which is the larger of the 2 buildings that are going to preside on St. Philip Street. And the floor-to-floor heights in the healthcare building align with the building behind, the large building behind. And so on the first floor of the building will be administrative offices. And we felt that using the commercial language of St. Philip Street was an appropriate strategy to help bring the scale of that first floor into the scale of the neighborhood. And so you see those storefronts there and awnings, and Gary will provide more detail about that. Next, please. So again, zeroing in a little more detail, you can see the storefronts and then the porch that's on the north side of the building. Next, please.
So in a large elevation of the healthcare building, can you go back one, please? And you can see how the storefronts of this building are relating to the storefronts of the bank building. And next, please. And then just detail the two pavilions at the north and the south to break down the scale, with the porch facing north. The second floor windows are, although larger than some of the adjacent houses, are slightly larger than what's on the bank building. And this is a function of this building having a larger floor to floor height. Next, please. And then just the unfolded elevations showing the Spring Street and the Alley Street side, which is meant to have a side porch. Next, please. And then moving to the freestanding building, which is rendered in clapboard and in blue. Next, please. It has a lower scale that is compatible to the adjacent houses and has simplified detailing and windows appropriate to the scale of the adjacent context. Next, please.
So this is an existing view looking south. Next. Before and after, before on the left, proposed, new proposal on the right. Next. One of the comments was to emphasize the verticality of the porch elements, which we think we've achieved here. Next, please.
So then moving to the taller building, which is set quite far back from St. Philip Street, the earlier design on the top and the proposed design on the bottom, this new design is all rendered in brick. We have removed the sloped roofs. We've taken the fenestration pattern of the building facing King Street and its wings and used it to come up with the design here. Most importantly, we're showing a setback at the 6th floor to help moderate the scale of the building in relationship to the neighborhood. Next, please. And here you can see it at a larger scale. The wings are now moving straight through the project from the east and west, and the center line of the tower and the King Street courtyard is the same center line as the courtyard facing to the west towards St. Philip. Next, please. And this shows where the setbacks are and how far back. The wings are 100 feet back from St. Philip, with the tower component being about 237. Next. This is moving to the north elevation where the alley is located. Next, please. With the before on the top and the proposed on the bottom, again, we have simplified the detailing and the windows to reflect the simplifications on King Street. Most importantly, we have also added a setback here in between the two bookends of the building at a 5th floor. Next, please. Excuse me, at the 6th floor. So here you see it at a larger scale. Scott, do you want to talk about the alley?
Right, so the north elevation presides over the new alley. The ground floor has windows that open to the proposed restaurant and cafe in the new building, closer to King Street. And then as you move further back, the openings are really responding to back of house. The alley will be heavily landscaped with trees and palms. And so really it's the first 2 or 3 floors of the building that will be mostly experienced by folks moving through there. And that's where the primary detail has been applied. Next, please.
And to our presenters, we're at the 22-minute mark. Do you think you need another 8 minutes to finish up?
No, I think we need 1 more minute at the most.
Sure. Of course.
So go to the next, please. And actually, the next slide is our last slide. So in conclusion, we feel that we've responded to the board and staff comments. And in so doing, we've designed buildings that respect their context and hopefully will provide an outstanding addition to our city. The main building is unified, it's quiet, it's refined, and it's peaceful. The design is sympathetic to the historic remnant, and the new directions for Spring and St. Philip Streets are appropriate to their context. All of this has been achieved by significant reductions in the overall building mass. We are very pleased with the progress that we've made, and we respectfully request conceptual approval. So thank you for your consideration and thank you for the additional time.
Thank you for that very comprehensive presentation. That was a lot to cover and you did it well and efficiently to my mind. I, for one, was impressed. Ms. Parrish, live public comment on this agenda item.
Here we have 3 speakers. We'll start with Mr. Justin Schwebler.
Thank you. This is Justin Schwebler with Historic Charleston Foundation. We would first like to thank the applicants for meeting with us regularly over the long design evolutions of this project. We feel that the design team is taking great steps to address the concerns of the board, the staff, and the preservation communities with regards to the historic Art Deco storefront and the development of the senior living facility as a whole. We're greatly pleased to see our recommendations for the massing along Spring Street taken into consideration to form a much more sympathetic view shed for the historic structures on the north side of Spring. We'd like to see greater reduction in the massing of the large building facing St. Philip, but we are appreciative that the applicants have eroded that portion of the building by 1 bay already to accommodate our concerns over the visual impact on that street. While this is a very large-scale development, it will provide a much-needed service to the senior citizens of the Charleston Peninsula, allowing them to age in an urban environment. And we feel that the applicants have taken the comments of the board, staff, and preservation community seriously and have incorporated them into a project that is ready to move forward. We recommend conceptual approval of the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. Further public comment.
We've got Ms. Erin Minigan.
Thank you. Erin Minigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. The Preservation Society appreciates the project team meeting with us on a consistent basis. We generally feel the design has made major improvements and appreciate the applicant's responsiveness to comments made at the previous meeting. Our priority remains the sensitive integration of the historic building in the new design, and we were encouraged to hear our concerns echoed by the board. While the new building has been slightly pushed back, it still feels overwhelming to the historic structure, and we would advocate for further relief to allow the historic building form to be better expressed. Otherwise, the simplification of fenestration and massing has enhanced the King Street elevation. However, the tower element continues to feel overly grand. In the spirit of simplifying this elevation, we feel the style and expression of details at the top of the central massing should be toned down. On the Spring Street elevation, we think the revisions to the massing, height, and architecture are all significant improvements. The one thing we feel should be studied for the next phase is the fenestration on the 3-story building component. Currently, all openings are windows, and we feel a door should be integrated to serve as a clear visual point of entry and better relate to other buildings on the streetscape. On the rear, we feel treating the whole building in brick and modifying the roof lines to a more subtle parapet form is a major step in the right direction. We previously spoke about concerns over impacts of the 7-story height on the predominantly 2 to 3-story height context of Cannon Borough, Elliott Borough. The reduction to 5 stories at the rearmost bay helps mitigate this issue. However, we feel the step down in massing should be increased to at least 2 bays for a more gracious and meaningful transition of height to the neighborhood. Finally, we are generally comfortable with the architectural direction of the smaller building fronting St. Philip Street, but are concerned the ground floor feels too commercial for the neighborhood setting. The significant amount of glazing and awnings are more similar to what you would see along King Street, and we feel this portion of the building should be restudied with a more residential treatment. As mentioned, we feel much more positively about the project, but ask that these comments be addressed, especially pertaining to massing adjustments at the historic building and at the rear elevation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Milligan. One more public comment?
I did have one more, but I have not found this individual in the attendance here.
And that name was, just so I can take a second.
Colton Karsh. He also had registered to speak for the George and Society Street project, but couldn't
Okay.
find him.
Okay, something must have come up. Very good. I'm comfortable moving to city and staff comments and recommendations.
That is not correct.
I'm sure Lawrence will move us. There we go.
Okay, there we go. Oh, that's better. Okay. Number one, regarding King Street, improvements include the alignment of the courtyard and cupola, relocation of the balconies, revision to respond to the street angle, simplification of the dormers, and employment of a single unified language and material palette. Staff suggests that the 6th and 7th floors might benefit by responding to the angles of the center portion instead of the street. Number two, the projected portions of the 2nd through 5th floors towards King Street are not equal in depth in order for the south portion to accommodate the Remnant building. These projections are equal in width and symmetrical in positioning around the motor court, and they should be made to match each other. Number three, shutters should be placed consistently or applicant should address the proposed placement. 4, at Spring Street, the proposed 3-story building close to the street fits in much better with the existing streetscape. Additionally, the architectural direction is improved with the flat roof and the omission of dormers and recessed balconies. The vehicular opening is large, however, it is set back. I'm sorry, that was meant to be. The vehicular opening is large, however, it is set back from the street, fully behind the smaller building, and in reality, light will filter through the opening from the other side, mitigating any concerns of it being cavernous. Provide appropriate landscaping and hardscaping to dress up the vehicular entry. And last, number 5, at St. Philip Street, the addition of storefront on the ground floor of the northern building is a positive. The transparency creates better engagement with the street and a good balance of surface and fenestration. While improved, there remains an issue of scale between the 2nd-story windows and those on adjacent existing buildings. The shutters help, but this should be restudied, even if reducing the window size requires the fenestration pattern to include additional windows. We're recommending conceptual approval for the project with partial deferral for massing of the 2nd through 5th floor projected area north of the motor court at King Street, and for general architectural direction related to the scale of elements on the northern building on St. Philip Street.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. That was a lot of ground to cover. The applicant has the ability to use up to 5 minutes to respond, rebut, or clarify if they choose to use it.
Yes, a couple of comments, and thank you, Tori. So with regard to the staff recommendation to provide a setback for the northern wing on King Street, we respectfully disagree. We feel that the street wall of King Street should be maintained. And we feel that the setback for the southern wing, which is a deviation from the norm, is only appropriate as it's a response to the historic remnant. And it should really only occur on the southern wing. And so that's how we're thinking about that. And, you know, by aligning the facade with King Street, it already makes those wings not in perfect symmetry. With regard to the window proportions for the northern building on St. Philip Street, we've developed a good working relationship with staff and are confident we can reach a solution with regard to window sizing, which possibly includes the addition of a 3rd row that would be sympathetic with the neighborhood. So we respectfully ask for your consideration and approval with conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. We will now move to board comments and a vote on this agenda item. What do my fellow board members have to say about the 609 King Street project?
I'll say very quickly that I know a lot of hours have been devoted to getting this project to where it is, and it has improved. And with that said, I agree with staff's comments and the recommendation.
I would like to commend our applicant for coming as far as they did on the King Street elevation in particular. The building we see now, in my mind, is a dramatic improvement, and you really did pay attention to our comments. I think when this project was initially pitched to us as being a major axis, when you're looking at it from Columbus and King, there was a lot of discussion about what that building should look like and how much of a marquee location it should be. For that reason, I'm okay with the monumental element in the middle and staying with the proportions that it has. And I think it's just a tremendously improved building, and that it pays appropriate homage to the orphan house without being a knockoff or a replica. And I think that's because you paid attention to the proportions and the rhythm of the original facade. I would agree with the staff comments regarding St. Philip Street and the issue regarding the scale of the fenestration in relation to the neighboring buildings. Further board comments?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank the entire project team for their commitment to the project, sticking with it. I believe that the massing of the top of the center tower is still somewhat overwhelming to me. And those are my only comments.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. Further board comments?
I will continue. So yes, we looked at this project for several times, and every time we see the improvements, and what we see right now is really a step forward. The building facade facing the King Street is much more urban, much more appropriate for Charleston. But at the same time, I would be in agreement with Preservation Society and what James just said, that Central Tower is a bit overwhelming. And I think it's part of it is because we have the hyphens between the wings, and so it's not as much continuity as, say, on the orphan building was. So it needs, in my mind, it needs a little bit more study and of the massing of that. The St. Philip Street facades, I totally agree with staff, and same as the what is it, Spring Street. So I would be in support of staff recommendations for each part of this project right now.
Thank you, Ms. Subject. Further board comments?
This is Kara Wheeler. I'd also like to thank the applicant for looking at the board and the previous board and staff comments and addressing them, simplifying the main building, which makes it much more authentic now that you treat the main building the same way on Spring Street and on King Street, generally the same way. I think some of the elements that staff mentions on St. Philip Street, the scale of the windows and other elements could probably be studied at the preliminary level, I think. Just want to mention on Spring Street, the small 3-story building the first floor could be studied. It looked in the perspective, it looked a little squatty, and the first floor might be better, a little bit taller, and the door might you should probably study as well how it will be accessed and approached. And other than that, I agree with staff comments.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. Anything further from the board? If not, may I entertain a motion? Anyone?
I can do recommendation for conceptual approval with staff recommendations and board comments. The conceptual approval for the project, I guess I can read the staff recommendations because it's that whole paragraph. And adding to that with board comments.
Okay, with board comments. So I'm going to reread it, Luda, and if I'm off, tell me that I'm off. Your motion, as I hear it, is for conceptual approval for the project with partial deferral for massing of the 2nd through 5th floor projected area north of the motor court at King Street for general architectural direction related to the scale of elements on the northern building on St. Philip Street and incorporating our other board and staff comments. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second to Ms. Subject's motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, Mr. White seconds. Ms. Wheeler, how do you vote on this motion?
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Can
I have also a question.
Question for
okay.
discussion on this. Just
go ahead.
So I would like to ask Caro and Jay and Luda as the architects, what we're voting on here with the embedded partial deferral for massing 2nd through 5th and general architectural direction. Is that doable? Is that because I think I'm voting for it also, but I just want to make sure, is that so complicated that it taxes them and makes it more difficult? Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, I think you can, I think it's pretty clear.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
don't see able to do that.
And could I clarify, let's say if, if the deferral for massing, if that would be addressed in the next rendition of the project as outlined in the staff comments, would they go back for another conceptual review or would they go back for a preliminary review? If staff's comments are being addressed in the next rendition.
They could come back with an application for preliminary.
Yeah.
And they could be successful so long as they address those items which were
what we've raised here. And that was my thinking as well. And I was generally comfortable with that concept. Is this narrows the issue and creates some consensus.
Yeah,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's all right. I think they're ready for that. I mean, they're far enough.
Okay.
I agree.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So we had the motion as I read it into the record. We had a second from Mr. White. And I was going to proceed to go down the roll now that we've answered our parliamentary question. Ms. Wheeler, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters.
Yay in favor.
Ms. Subject.
Yay in favor.
Mr. White.
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Thank you to the applicant for an excellent presentation and for using an iterative process to come up with a very good design headed in the right direction.
And happy birthday, Scott.
Right, Scott. Happy birthday. At least you get to go home and tell your family now that it worked at BAR for hours, all for naught. So happy birthday. Hope you have a great dinner and some cake.
You got a gift.
I did. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, so we'll see everybody in person next time. Is that right?
I hope, Tori.
Is that right, Tori?
Yes. Yes, but if you thought there were tech difficulties tonight, I just want to warn you that Lawrence and I may be operating cameras in 2 weeks and all that. So just be patient with us as we figure that one out.
We're we'll handle that the same way we've handled everything for the past 2 years now. We'll, with a
Yeah.
little bit of grace and indulgence, and we'll all be all right. And so unless there's further comment, I'll look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.